Well, welcome to the mini build. This is a mini build with a Nissan 16 valve K11 engine. This will be episode 13 and it's all about the rebuild of the engine. The target on this particular engine is for it to produce around about 130-140 horsepower. It's got all the right ingredients: 774 rally cams, high compression, different exhaust, throttle bodies, bit of porting, and this episode is all about the rebuild of the cylinder head assembly, the bottom end, crank, rods, pistons, and bolting it all back together. It's quite a long video, this one, so what I advise you do is put it on pause, get yourself a cup of tea, or better still a drink of beer, and enjoy the video. Well, as you can see, I've got the head back now, and I've had it skimmed. So I'm just in a position now I'm going to get the valves in. Okay, so I've just got to the point where I've got all 15 valves in, just the last one to go. So I'll just go through the process of fitting valves if it's something you're not familiar with. So I've got a sort of cleaned up valve. These have been lapped in as I've shown on a previous video. I had these covered with a sort of preservation oil whilst I was waiting for the head to come back and get ready to reassemble. And then the collets and the valve spring cap I've double cleaned, so they squeaky clean. Checked them for any defects, any cracks or anything. And then also, what I'm also fitting to this engine is a full set of brand new valve springs. So they're all ready to go. Now, in terms of process, what I do, I'll just bring my little cap in here. This has got some engine oil in. I'm using a mineral 1540. I do put a little spot of oil just on the valve stem to begin with, just lubricate that, and then slot it into the valve guide. Just rotate the valve in the guide just to get the oil dispersed thoroughly. One thing I will note, one thing I have replaced as a matter of course really, is all the valve stem oil seals. I'm not forgetting the washers at the bottom here. There's the valve just popping through. Spring, again, I just put a little bit of oil top and bottom of that, just to try and help any metal to metal contact on startup. And then valve cap on. And the next part of the job is to get the valve spring compressor in place. Okay, that's now in positioning. So the next little step is getting the collets in. So what I found much easier to help you out with this is a pair of tweezers. And the other little thing I do is get some general purpose grease, which is very nice and clean, and just put a smear inside each of the two collets. And once you've done that, the grease helps to hold the collet to the valve stem itself. Without that, it's virtually impossible. And then you probably can't see what I'm doing here, but the trick is to get the collet onto the valve stem and just sort of nestle it in place best you can with the tweezers, and then try and get the collets to sit nicely against the valve, and then very carefully just release the valve spring compressor. Clear that out of the way, careful not to scratch anything on the way, and take a good look to make sure the collets are seated correctly. So here's one of the bucket tappets with its shim. These are going back in exactly the same order. I hope to maintain the same valve clearances. I have lapped the valves in here, so that may reduce the clearance a little tiny bit, and the shims, if required, can be reduced in thickness, and if we need to do that, I'll show you how that's done. But in the meantime, I'm going to start fitting these. So I'm just going to put a coat of oil on each of the tappets, and then a little bit of oil beneath the shim, making sure it's the original way up, and then drop that into position, making sure it's seated correctly. Okay, I'll just stop here, just mention a quick tip about a subject if you're wishing to paint the rocker cover. Now this one here, it's aged, it's a bit tatty looking, so my plan is to paint it. And the tip is really, if you just want these letters here, the Nissan Twin Cam logo to just stand out a bit more, what I've done on here, because the letters are quite rounded to begin with and don't stand out too good, is just draw a file over the top of the letters. And if you keep doing that very carefully, what you do is sharpen the edges up of the letter. It just gives you that sort of nice machine look about it. So the plan is to paint it, and then I'll just run the file over just to paint off these letters. Okay, I've got the new camshafts in there. These are the 774 rally cams. I've just got one last bearing cap to fit. It's all clean. The important thing on here is to check the oil way is absolutely clear and obviously the bearing surface isn't damaged. And then just before assembly I put some assembly lubrication into the bearing, onto the camshaft bearing, or camshaft itself rather, and a spot of oil on the threads, and then just locate that on. And of course it's important to keep all these bearings in the original order. So I've just put these bolts in literally finger tight. Now there's a sequence of course to settle the camshaft next, which will be the next job. Now the important thing is here is before you start tightening the camshaft down is make sure you've got clearance under the head, because as soon as you start tightening the camshaft down and settling the valve gear, valves will start to open, so you need to have clearance underneath the head. Okay, I've got the camshafts in and torqued down to the prerequisite torque setting, which is between 6 and 9 pounds. I've opted for about 7.5 to 8. And check the valve clearances. Bear in mind this is a cam that's been produced from a blank. So I've put it in, and the good news is that the clearances are all within. Trick is, if you can, is try and get the feeler gauge fairly flat rather than curved, as it were, to get a good reading. And what you should aim to do is the gauge, or the feeler gauge, just slide in and out with moderate effort, not forcing it in. It should glide in and out. Should that gap have been too small, then I'd have to take a little bit off the shim. Okay, I'm at the point now where I'm starting to rebuild the bottom end assembly, and as you can see here I've got 5 boxes of new main bearings. Now these are graded, and to ensure that you get the correct grading you'll need a number on the bottom of the block stamped in, and also a number off the front web of the crank. Now the best bet, certainly what I've done, I spoke to Matthew at Humphris Motorsport, and he married the numbers up and got me the right grade of bearings. So what I've done here, I've laid all the rings out. I've got the new shells for the big ends all laid out again in numeric order. So the plan is I'll build a piston up and conrod assembly and then fit it to each of the cylinders in turn and torque. So what I'm going to do is just, I've got the oil in the bores already pre-oiled, so I'm just going to settle a ring in the bore. So I'll just demonstrate how I'm going to do this. So each ring will just be placed in the bore. So now I've got the top ring in the bore here. I'm just going to just push it into position, reasonable distance down the bore. Just to make sure it's all square in the bore, so it's not at an angle of any description. The next job then is just to get the feeler gauge and measure the gap. So I've just placed the second ring in cylinder 1 here, and I've pre-checked this gap, but I'm just going to illustrate how to do it. So I've just got a feeler gauge in the gap. It's very difficult to film actually with the camera in the way, but that gap there is a nice 15th thou. Now the spec for the second ring is 11 to 17, so it's pretty well right in the middle of the allowable tolerance. The results from measuring all the rings in all 4 cylinders, I've got the results noted down here. They're all broadly the same across all cylinders, and they are all within the spec. The top rings in pretty well all cases actually are towards the top end of the allowable gap, but certainly the second ring in all is well within. It's in the middle of the spec point, and likewise for the oil rings as well, they're midpoint. So the reason I've done this and noting things down in case there was some that were tight and some were a bit loose, I could do a swap over. Okay, I've just got the rings fitted. Now the important thing is here, one little tip if you've not fitted rings before, is the oil expander ring is fit that one first, and then the top and bottom oil ring sort of second and third, and then the second ring do that fourth, and then the top ring last. And then the next thing is to then rotate the rings to the respective places. And you'll need to look at the manual to get the correct offset. And the other thing to check is just make sure the piston number, if you look at the big end cap, it does have a number on its side, just to let's get that a bit closer to the camera. One of the things I've elected to do on this engine is replace the timing chain, the sprockets, and there are a total of 4, the tensioners, the guides, and here. And what I've done, the chain has a different coloured link. So this is a chain with I think 36 links altogether, and either side of this different coloured link here, there are 18 links. So it's a symmetrical chain with another link that's a dissimilar colour again at the top here, and they are used for alignment purposes. So just to aid things along, I've put a little white bit of paint on this link and also the corresponding tooth. What you can't see too well, just in here is a little spot on the bottom sprocket here as an alignment point. The other point, whilst I'm in this area, there are 2 seals that need to be fitted prior to the timing chain going on. There's this one here that runs this drain, and also around this engine mount boss here as well. There's another seal in there. So one of the little jobs I've need to do is to re-establish the timing marks on the pulley. Now the pulley behind this timing wheel here, and I've also the pulley turned down its diameter, so it's lost its original timing marks. So I've now got to establish where TDC is and mark it up on this pulley. The next step is to set up the DTI. Now, what I've done here, I've set up the DTI so 0 reads at TDC here. I'll just move the crank either side of TDC so you can see it on the 0 mark. And then the idea is then to take it before top dead centre, then bring it within 10th out of the top. So I'm going to aim for the 10 marker on the dial. That's 10th out before. I'm then going to take a measurement off the timing wheel on the front of the engine here, and that's just a relative point, which I've just noticed is 5 degrees, but that's just a relative point. I'll then continue to turn the engine up to TDC, and then 10th out after TDC back to the mark I've just been on, just here. I then take a measurement on the timing wheel, and I know between the two there's 11 degrees, and the idea to split that difference of 5.5 degrees to mark the new TDC. So you can see here I've got the timing wheel off now. I've just put a spot of paint on here, just going to allow that to dry, and then I could draw a line between this pointer here and the centre of the crank. The edge of this white paint is exactly TDC. Well, I've got to the point now where the head's all built up ready, the block is all done, cranks in, pistons are in, everything's all built up all the way to make the two together. So I've got a fresh head gasket. Next job is to strip the cams out again, simply because the head bolts on this particular engine need clearance to get through to the bottom of the head here, so the cams have to be stripped out and then reassembled once the head's fitted to the block. Okay, so I've got the head fitted and torqued down, 10 main head bolts, plus the 4 at the front, 2 inside the timing chain cover, 2 outside and 1 at the back here. So they're all torqued to the factory spec. What I did do before I put the head on is ensure that I've got the cylinders part the way through the stroke, so they're not at TDC. So when I put the camshafts on, I know there's going to be no interference between the valves, which are open, and pistons. So make sure you've got clearance before you fit the head, and more importantly when you fit the camshafts. Okay, I've got the camshafts back in place now. The bearing caps are literally just finger tight. They're just found the threads, and I've just got them finger tight with the socket on. Just been through them in the sequence, so there's no pressure being applied to the camshafts at all really, apart from their own weight. So the next step now is to torque the bearing caps up in 3 stages, following the tightening sequence, and it's quite an important step, this. If you don't follow the procedure properly, there's a risk that you will snap a camshaft, which is something you don't want to do on a brand new installation. So now they're set to the factory spec, I can now in a position to recheck the valve players. They should be fine, there's no reason why they shouldn't be. So the next job is to get the timing chain aligned. The next job is to get the main timing wheel in place, and the first thing you must do is put this chain onto the wheel itself. If you don't do that and you put the timing wheel in position, there's not enough clearance in order to get the chain through a small gap at the bottom here. So that's the first thing you have to do, and I've just tied that off with a bit of wire just to stop it dropping down. And the next job then is to get the marker point here in line with this coloured link on the chain itself. So, and then once you've done that, you can then feed the chain in place and then pop it in position, put the bolt through. Not an easy job, I might add. It does take a little bit of perseverance to do that. Bit of a tip when you come to fit the timing chain, this short chain here that drives the cams, make sure your links in the right position here. I think it's 11 and 10 here, 10 pins and 14 pins on this leg here, so do check that before you assemble it. And then just to help out, an extra sort of pair of hands is use a bungee cord here just to hold the chain in place. So now it's in position, I can move this up, put the bolt in, hopefully it'll tie together, and the spigot here will stop the chain dropping off. Also checking the spot here and the coloured link, and the same on the back here, coloured link and the spot. The next job to do, once you've got your chain assembly in place and the 2 sprockets on the camshafts, the next part of the job is to time the cams up accurately. Now you need to be really careful about this. First of all, when you bring the engine up to TDC, you must make sure that the valves on the respective pistons are in the closed position. So at the moment TDC, you've got 1 and 4 at the top of its stroke, and the valves on 1 and 4 are either just partially off the seats or closed. So 1's closed, 4's just slightly off the seat, which is okay. Once you've established TDC on cylinder 1, I've got a timing wheel in place to confirm that. I've now got a DTI placed on the inlet valve on cylinder 4. TDC, you want 1.8mm of lift on the inlet side and 1.75mm of lift on the exhaust side. So what I've done, I've brought the cams to the factory position, and if you look at the spigot point, the dowel, it's virtually lined up but not quite. It's probably about 0.5 millimetre to a whole millimetre difference on the sprocket here. So what I'm going to do is just bring the camera around and I'll just show you how the cam is timed up from this perspective here. On cylinder 4 inlet I've got no lift at all, so I can just confirm that just by rotating the cam ever so slightly, and if I move it clockwise you'll see it starting to lift here. The DTI is going down, indicating lift. So I'll just bring that to no lift here, and I'm using you may be able to see an imperial DTI here rather than a metric, but it's either 1.8mm on the inlet side or 71 thou. So what I'm going to do is rotate the camshaft round, so I'm creating lift at this point here, and what I'm looking for on the DTI, you'll be able to see it in the red lettering, is an indication of 71 thou. So you can see that's the hole there for the spigot pin, and as you can see it's just slightly off. So I wouldn't normally be able to get a pin in there. What I'm going to have to do is just grind away or file away a little bit of the sprocket here. I've just put that white line across in paint just to indicate I need to take off around about 3/4 mm to a mil, and then once that's happened, the spigot pin will fit in here, and the washer that fits on here will just hold that pin, make sure it doesn't come out, and it's all bolted up. And then a similar sort of exercise for the exhaust camshaft, except that the settings there on the lift is 1.75mm rather than 1.8. And once you've done that and everything's torqued up correctly, is make sure that when you rotate the engine there's no interference, so just go very steadily, just going through each cylinder methodically, so when it comes up to TDC, valves are shut, and then just keep going through all 4 cylinders to make sure that's correct, as it were, so there's no clashes. Well, now I've got this engine all assembled, and the next step is to get the sump on. I've just put the oil strainer and oil feed into the oil pump. That's there's a gasket here as well, so that's torqued down, all set, and the bracket fixed onto the main bearing carrier. On the ends here, the end seals, the way Nissan finished this off, when I took the engine apart, there was a little bit of sealant just at the start of the seal here, so I've just replicated what Nissan do. And then the seals, there are two seals, and they are different. So there's a front and there's a back. So the front one is slightly larger. Well, the final piece to fit is the rocker cover. What I've done all the torque checkings, all the bolts inside the timing chain area here. So I've torqued the cams up to about 90 pounds and the idle pulley to about 40. That's all set. Internal head bolts are all set. So just before putting the rocker cover on, I've pre-filled the engine with oil. I've put at least a couple of litres in so far, and I've also pre-filled the oil filter. And if you're on a rotating stand such as I've got here, you can turn the engine horizontal and put the oil filter on vertically to keep the oil inside of it, so when it spills, and bring it back to vertical for the remaining part of the fill. So just before I put the rocker cover, there's just these 2 half moons here. There's a little bit of sealant to be fitted in, squeezed in here, just a small trace, just for the rubber seals to sit onto. So that's the next little job. I can put the rocker cover on, and that's the main assembly done then. Okay, that's the mechanical part of the engine rebuild all complete now. I do need to change the injectors here. I'm going to put some Nissan K11 injectors in, which have a better spray pattern than the original K11, so they're going to be a straight swap in. But the next video will be about wiring, ECU and sort of final installation, and hopefully get it running. So that's it for now. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, give us a thumbs up. Any questions, put them in the comments below. I will put a link to Matthew Humphris and Humphris Motors in the description below. So if anybody needs any engine parts in particular, or for that matter Nissan Micra Rally parts, he's the go-to person for that sort of thing. So until the next time, take care and stay safe. Bye for now.